Have you ever been hungry? And I'm not talking like, hey, it's been since like noon and it's 2 o'clock and I'm kind of hungry right now, kind of hungry, right? I mean like ravishingly hungry, or even so hungry that you actually stopped being hungry, or the idea of food like isn't exactly the most palatable thing. For me, the most hungry that I can remember was as a novice. We were studying history in Denver, Colorado, and on the weekends we would go and kind of climb some of the local hills there. They refer to them as mountains. You know, and of course as novices we thought, man, we're going to tackle all the 14ers, right? And there's one set of 14,000-foot mountains called Grays and Torreys. Both of these are 14,000 feet tall, and they're kind of one mountain with a little saddle in between, right? So our goal was to go to one peak, go through the saddle, and climb the second one. And by the time I'd gotten there, right, I had a backpack with food and stuff, like I was exhausted. Like I'd never worked so hard. I'd never been in a place where like I could barely breathe, let alone like think of the idea that I was going to eat. And I don't know if my body type gives it away, but I'm not exactly a fruits and vegetables kind of guy. I had an orange there that was the most perfect blend of citrus and sweet and palatable that I've ever had in my life. It was the best orange I've ever had in my life. And I'm not exactly a huge fan of oranges, but it was perfect. It was exactly what my body needed in that moment. I mean, I just savored every moment of that orange, you know, every little fiber, every little bit of that juice, everything just was exactly what I needed in that moment. You know, and then I ate the rest of my lunch and then had to proceed down the mountain. We'll get back to that. But I gotta imagine that in some ways, the apostles and the people who've been hanging out with Jesus this whole time are kind of on the edge of that, right? They've been walking around, they're in the middle of a deserted place, which means that they had to, you know, they intentionally went away. They went hiking, right? They weren't like, oh, we're just in our neighborhood and we're kind of hanging out near our village, right? They went to a different place. Like they made sure that they were kind of going with Jesus, who often always shows us the way to prayer, right? There's always sort of the sense that when Jesus goes away, it's because he's desiring to sort of be close to God. And, you know, especially in the ancient world and for Jesus, those were on mountains, on these plains, and in the middle of nowhere, right? This is where we were going to, you know, get away from those distractions and really sort of enter into where we are with God, right? So they've been walking and have been traveling for quite some time. And then, of course, like Jesus is preaching for a while, and we know that this story sort of comes on the heels of his long sermon on the plain, at least for Luke and for other parts of this gospel. Jesus has been doing a lot of work. And then finally, it's late, people are tired, and they're like, yeah, we don't have enough food. And even if they did, let's be honest, I mean, at least for me, bread and fish aren't exactly what I call my ideal dinner, right? I mean, at least maybe those are parts of my ideal dinner, right? The fish probably is deep fried. If you've never been to the Tavern on Grand, you should, because then you would know what I'm talking about, right? This really fantastic, you know, deep fried walleye dinner. And it isn't just the walleye, you know, usually I get 2 fillets because I'm big, and I also get like, you know, the lemon, I get the tartar sauce, I get the, you know, the fries and stuff like that. And then, you know, there are vegetables there. I notice them, you know, as we're sort of going through this sort of exquisite meal and stuff like that. You know, bread and fish, especially since they, you know, it's probably dried fish, right? You know, they don't mention like starting a fire for this, so like I'm not even getting my bread toasted here, folks. Right? We're not talking like the most delectable meal. And yet, in this moment in which they're receiving far more than just physical sustenance, this moment when they recognize that they're really doing something quite miraculous. And they only notice it, right? There's a certain sense in which, you know, they kind of go about, and as they're breaking the bread, they're not really paying attention. The story tells us they recognize this miracle when they gather what was left over, when they sort of take stock of their community after they've participated in this wonderful meal. And there are 12 wicker baskets, right? And I don't know about you, but I'm not imagining like the wicker baskets that we have at the entrances here, you know, just kind of tiny wicker baskets. I mean, the intention is that like full on, like we're going to put like a several days worth of food in these wicker baskets as they're sort of walking out going, now what do we do? Because we got to walk home with these massive baskets of bread, right? This sense in which what is left over far surpasses anything they could have had in that potential sort of moment of sharing. Or maybe the best expression has nothing to do with food. Because this weekend we celebrate the anniversary of June 19th, 1865, when 250,000 enslaved men, women, and children were liberated in the Galveston Harbor, the Galveston Bay in Texas, the true and final end of slavery in the United States, when they were liberated by 2,000 Union soldiers. Maybe it's that kind of hunger, desire, and fulfillment that we actually see in today's gospel. Not just having a good meal, but your entire life is transformed in a moment in which you are able to participate for the first time truly as a free person. And the truth is, I don't know if I have that experience simply because I have not experienced the oppression, the frustration, the pain, the ostracization, the othering that has happened, especially to the African American community up to that point, let alone what has happened since all of those years. But I think it's fitting that this weekend we celebrate not only the feast of the body and blood of Christ, but we also recognize that moment as we try to understand what has been happening in our culture and in our world. You see, for the last several years, and this is for me for sure, I don't know about all of you, I kind of feel like I'm back on that mountain in Colorado again, constantly climbing, and it's an 8-mile hike, but it takes about 6 hours to complete, right? And at a certain point, I think I'm about to hit the top of that mountain, only to find out it's a faux ridge, right, where you get over it, you go, oh, there's still more mountain to climb. There's still a bigger hill up there for me to go to. And I'm looking at our history. I'm looking at our community, and I'm wondering, have I really understood sort of the mystery and the beauty of this beautiful and amazing sacrament that is the fullness of the body and blood of Christ? But also we say, we sing, we think, we act, our liturgy, our theology says that the people of God are also the body and blood of Christ. And have I treated the rest of the body and blood of Christ with as much intention, reverence, or love that I treated that orange on that day of climbing that first mountain? Have I paid attention to the hurts, the cries, and the pleas of a community that is still in pain, that is still angry, and still needing our participation with them to truly live out what it means to be brothers and sisters in Christ and living the fullness of this body and blood of Christ? We see an answer of how we move into that, because I believe that the celebration, and those of you who, maybe you'll celebrate with us tomorrow as we do our procession, but tomorrow we will celebrate with St. Peter Claver, and they'll come over here because we went over there last year, kind of trading, worship spaces, but they're going to come here and we are going to celebrate as a community and really enter into sort of that body and blood of Christ. And perhaps the question then is this: how do we do that? How do we live that out? And we have 3 wonderful other readings besides the Gospels to give us a clue in order. The first reading, that priest of Melchizedek, just that body and blood, that sort of symbolism that happens there. For the ancient Jewish world, they didn't see it the way we do, as sort of that magnificent forerunner of Christ, but they saw it as life-giving sustenance, that moment of breaking bread with someone else. And Abram responds by giving a tenth of everything that he has. Are we willing to give just a tenth of our energy to building up the body and blood of Christ? I don't know what that looks like for each and every one of us, but a tenth of that 1 out of every 10 days we say we have to do something that is helping make our body and our communion of Christ, the people of God, better and stronger in that whole process. And we hear in the responsorial psalm the priest Melchizedek, and tomorrow at 10:30 there will also be a baptism in which we are all reminded that we are baptized priest, prophet, and king, and thus we have a role to use our voices, a role to use our responsibility, that inheritance to fight for justice, to fight for a community. Or when we hear the beautiful first and probably the earliest words in our tradition of that beautiful prayer that is said at the Eucharist from the Apostle Paul, we should also recognize the context in which it is elaborated, right? Paul is saying that this meal is different. What we do when we celebrate this feast is not just eating when you're at your homes. You have homes you can go eat in. He actually says that just before these lines, right? He's actually inviting us to sort of go deeply into this understanding that we can and must celebrate this meal differently. And so the invitation is actually quite simple, my friends. As we come to celebrate this most sacred meal, this most amazing meal, this mysterious meal in which Christ is fully present, what are we being invited to give back? What are we being invited to sort of bring to the altar so that it can be transformed? And who do we want to invite to participate with us? Not because we need to convert them or transform them, but rather, who do we need to invite into our community to celebrate, to have the fullness of the body and blood of Christ? Like those disciples on that amazing plain so long ago, when it comes time to gather the fragments left over, what are we going to find?